Good evening. I want to talk to you tonight from my heart on a subject of deep concern to every American. In recent months, members of my administration and officials of the Committee for the Re-election of the President, including some of my closest friends and most trusted aides, have been charged with involvement in what has come to be known as the Watergate affair.
Richard Nixon and the Watergate Scandal by Andrew Holmes. June 17, 1972. 5 men are arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. On site, police found wiretapping equipment and cameras to capture every aspect of the Democrats' presidential campaign. The 5 men were found to be part of the Committee for the Re-election of the President, or the CRP. They were James McCord, Virgilio Gonzalez, Frank Sturgis, Eugenio Martinez, and Bernard Barker. On site, James McCord was found to have the phone number of E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA member and close associate to Richard Nixon. As the story came out, the public began to wonder why a villain such as McCord would have the phone number of a powerful executive such as Hunt. It turns out, Hunt had formulated the entire plan along with G. Gordon Liddy, CRP chief lawyer. Then, in November of 1972, Nixon won the re-election by the largest percentage in history, a 20% lead over his opponents, thus continuing as the 37th President of the United States. In January 1973, Judge John J. Sirica began to head the Watergate trials, controversially going directly to witnesses for information. 4 of the men pled guilty, while McCord was sent to prison, refusing to cooperate. Then, attempting to shorten his sentence, McCord sent Judge John J. Sirica this letter, stating, 1. There was political pressure applied to the defendants to plead guilty and remain silent. 2. Perjury occurred during the trial in matters highly material to the very structure, orientation, and impact of the government's case, and to the motivation and intent of the defendant. 3. Others involved in the Watergate operation were not identified during the trial, when they could have been by those testifying. McCord's letter went public and worried some of the higher-ups in the scandal, alluded to by McCord. As of this letter, the Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities, collectively known as the Senate hearings, was established, with Senator Sam Ervin as chairman, and would go live on TV, making the entire nation a part of the investigation. All were watching. In face of the letter's release, John Dean, Nixon's legal counsel, felt he had to speak in front of the Senate. Providing details on his conversation with Nixon about the situation at hand, Dean stated,
When I had earlier told him that I thought I was involved in an obstruction of justice situation, he had argued with me to the contrary after I'd explained it to him. Also, when the matter of money demands had come up, previously he had very nonchalantly told me that was no problem. I did not know if he realized that he himself could be getting involved in an obstruction of justice. I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it. I also told him that it was important that this cancer be removed immediately because it was growing more deadly every day.
Dean proved more so than the letter that there was some sort of involvement from that of the executives of the White House. On April 30th, 1973, Nixon made a public announcement to the people, stating,
In one of the most difficult decisions of my presidency, I accepted the resignations of 2 of my closest associates in the White House, Bob Haldeman, John Ehrlichman. It was also necessary to name a new Attorney General. The counsel to the President, John Dean, has also resigned.
At this point, trust in Nixon is being questioned by the American people, as his announcement makes involvement questionable. While little is known about the case itself, his credibility has faltered. A Lewis Harris poll found that the nation was split, 51% believing his credibility has faltered, and 54% believing he has improved the situation. These numbers would continually change as time went on, with more and more people siding against Nixon. On July 16th, Alexander Butterfield, a former aide of Nixon's, revealed that there were tapes of all White House phone calls made while Nixon was in office. Nixon had ended the taping prior to this, but this was the first time that they were revealed to the public. The Watergate Committee now needed the tapes, and a battle for the tapes pursued. Special prosecutor on the case, Archibald Cox, acting independently from the White House, subpoenaed the tapes. Nixon offered edited transcripts, but Cox refused. Nixon then attempted to fire Cox, forcing Attorney General Richardson to do so, but he resigned as a result. Richardson's assistant William Ruckelshaw is then ordered to do the same, but he also resigns. Finally, Nixon ordered Solicitor General Robert Bork to fire Cox, who carried out the order. This entire ordeal, coined as the Saturday Night Massacre, creates scores of criticism against Nixon, and talk of impeachment begins to surface. Due to criticism, Nixon decides to hand over some of the tapes. Then, on November 17th, Nixon attempts to defend himself, giving a speech that the American people would use against him for the duration of the scandal.
I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
At this point, another Lewis Harris poll revealed just how much trust the American people had toward their president. 83% of people had a negative opinion toward Nixon. 59% wanted him to resign if proven to have known about the case, and 65% said he should be impeached if involved. There was a growing bias toward the government encompassing all Americans. Even after giving up many of the subpoenaed tapes, the White House still claimed that some of the tapes were destroyed which were part of the subpoena. There are also gaps in the tapes, including an 18.5-minute gap in which Nixon's secretary claimed she may have erased accidentally. Nixon's reasoning for holding on to the tapes was that of executive privilege, something that did not seem to make sense to Americans. Why should Nixon demand executive privilege when powers such as the Senate and House Judiciary are demanding his cooperation? Nixon was involved in the scandal, and people were finally beginning to realize this with certainty. Congress had formed 22 resolutions for impeachment after the Saturday Night Massacre, and on February 6, 1974, the Judiciary Committee was authorized to contemplate impeachment. By April 16th, Nixon had released full transcripts of all subpoenaed tapes. Some of these released tapes captured audio of Nixon and Haldeman speaking to each other 6 days after the break-in, and proved that Nixon ordered the FBI to end the investigation. Hearings began taking place on Nixon's impeachment as of May 9th, and an 8-0 decision in the Supreme Court determined that Nixon's defenses had dissolved completely. 3 articles of impeachment were written up, claiming that Nixon had interfered with the Watergate investigation, disregarded his oath of office and power, and failed to adhere to House subpoenas. Americans were not happy with Nixon either. Listening to the tapes on the daily news and continually hearing "expletive deleted" revealed a darker side of Nixon, one that kept Americans from feeling that their president was as admirable as originally believed. Nixon's administration realized now that Nixon had little chance of staying in office. On August 8, 1974, Nixon publicly announced,
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Watergate was over, and it had lasted over 2 years. On the surface, Watergate did appear to be over. With the media coverage being what it was, the news could be relayed to millions of people at a time, and the entire nation was involved as a result. The media brought about news of dishonesty and evasion of the truth, and the government lost the people's loyalty because of this. The feeling developed that the nation was no longer united, and in times of hardship the general opinion came to be that the government was the problem. Overall, Watergate taught Americans that the U.S. was not necessarily the greatest nation in the world. With the unintelligent manner with which Watergate was handled, much of the world's opinion came to be that the American government was just outright ridiculous. Watergate proved just how much power the president had. Congress had scaled executive privilege to a point where the system of checks and balances did not work. Checks and balances needed to be reinstated in such a way that this would not happen again. Watergate also formed a growing divide between Republicans and Democrats. America's newfound lack of confidence and the outpouring of revelations the scandal produced meant that Watergate was a turning point. Future presidents would do their best at moving on from the event, but the challenge of restoring confidence is one that, even to this day, has not been fully accomplished.